So today we're gonna talk about how to keep improving no matter what is going on in your life. For those of you that don't necessarily want to stick around, here's the TLDR of the whole thing. Establish a goal. So probably that's to be a really good shooter. Then establish milestones or little steps along the way that you want to reach. That's probably get good at gripping your gun, get good at establishing a sight picture. Next is start working on those goals, track those goals, meaning write them down on paper and hold accountability to them. Then practice those things. And then when you practice those things, you want to go ahead and track them. You want to make sure that you note those things. And then whenever you find that there are deficiencies or problems that you need to fix, go back and work on those fixes and do it all over again until you eventually get to your goal. Now, if you wanted to stick around and break that down into further detail, you'll realize that this entire skill actually is almost a continually non-stop, ever-changing, ever-growing, ever-evolving thing. Meaning, depending on the things that are going on in your life, there's always something that you can do to get better at every stage and at every part of what it is to become a good shooter, depending on what that is for you and your definition of what a good shooter is. And if you define that as someone who is potentially good in a self-defense scenario, or if you want to test that in, say, a competitive setting, which I highly recommend, it's going to be something that's going to keep evolving over time, and you're going to keep working on developing. By developing, I mean you'll find something wrong with it, you'll test it, and you'll keep moving forward to make it better. First of all, establishing a big goal. What is the big goal for you as a shooter? Again, what are you trying to do? Is this just for self-defense? Are you just trying to get comfortable with taking your self-defense firearm or pistol out of the safe, removing it from its safe queen status, taking it to the range and becoming more comfortable with it, which in itself can be a good starting goal? Or are you actually trying to go and compete with it, which is kind of a next evolution of the whole process, which actually puts you in situations that challenge your ability to work under pressure? So that actually would be the next closest thing to experiencing an actual self-defense situation, other than maybe taking on specific training that puts you in scenarios that do that. Again, first step, establish the greater goal. Once you've established that greater goal, obviously you can't just jump to becoming whatever that end point is. You can't just become the shooter that you have in your head. So you're gonna have to figure out what direction you're gonna wanna go to establish what becoming a good shooter is. If that's competition, which again, I would highly recommend, because by going and competing, you actually force yourself to build new skills, test those skills in a high pressure setting, and then go back and fix them so that you can be competitively better later. So if the road you want to take to get better at shooting is a competitive road, then that makes it a hell of a lot easier to figure out what little things you need to do to get better along the way. How does this tie into the bigger idea of the video? Because sometimes things will happen in life. You might not be able to get up and walk around because you got an injury, you got into an accident, finances are tight, you're not going to be able to go out and shoot necessarily as much. You can work on different elements or different little pieces of the bigger goal and still get better along the way. While your timeline for getting better might stretch and shrink depending on the situation, depending on the season, depending on your finances and all those things, you can still work on some element or some little piece of the bigger goal to get better. For example, you got in an accident, you can't walk around because you broke your leg, then you can just work on dry fire. You can do that in the comfort of your home. You can sit around and work on the different elements of dry fire, which magically happens to be, honestly, one of the biggest components in training for a lot of the biggest and best professionals. I'm a nobody. I've only really been shooting for going on maybe 2.5 to 3 years. In the first year, I was very anxious and very nervous about even just going to the range. It was a big deal. Figuring out all the things to do at the range was a big deal, because shooting as a sport is a very engaging, very challenging sport, because there's a lot going on, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of safety involved. And so it's important that you really narrow in and focus on those things, which are actually more elements that you can focus on for the bigger goal. Once you've established your goal, once you've established the direction that you want to go, then you want to kind of break apart the things that you feel you need to work on to get better and get yourself closer to every single step or milestone that gets you closer to the bigger goal. Funny thing about that is, as you unwrap all these little elements, you're gonna find other little elements that you're gonna discover are uniquely challenges for you, or maybe not necessarily challenges, but things that you have to work on your own to get better. Because while a buddy of yours maybe has really delicate, soft hands that needs to work on your grip. You have really strong hands and you need to actually ease back and not over grip as much. Once again, it kind of depends on your individual situation and your circumstance to figure out what other little elements about the sport you're gonna need for yourself to get better along the way. Now, in order for you to get better, not only do you have to take the things that you just discovered and work on them, you have to actually track them. Because if you don't track them, then you won't know if you're getting better. So say, for example, that you are over gripping or the pressures in your hand are kind of off for your grip, then you're gonna have to pay attention to the fact that maybe if you grip it a little too much, if you overdrive it, if there's too much pinky pressure, if you're putting too much pressure in your support hand, not enough pressure in your support hand, these little things can sort of tell you what it is you need to keep improving, and you won't know them unless you actually pay attention and track them. So maybe by tracking them on a notebook or an app on your phone is gonna be the thing that helps, because you can try it, test it, write it down, pay attention to it, change whatever you need to change, try it again, test it again, write down the changes if there are any, and do it over and over again. Obviously, regardless of whatever step it is that you are along this path, accountability is an important thing. I know that's a big word, and it really just means paying attention to yourself and the things that you're doing so that you can make sure that you actually progress forward in what you're doing. Because if you just start off by thinking, I've got this all figured out, I know what a gun is, you just take this hunk of metal or hunk of plastic, you pull the trigger, and then it goes boom, and then you point it in the right direction that you want to point it at so that it puts holes on paper or makes sounds on steel, you might be oversimplifying, and you might need to pay a little more attention to what it is you do in order for you to actually get better. If you have set the goal, if you have set the milestones or steps along the way, if you have been paying attention to things along the way, noting them, testing them, adjusting, and recalibrating, or doing it all over again to make sure that you're doing it the right way, what you're gonna wanna do next is move on to the next step or the next stage or the next skill that you need to develop. Now, your legs are working again. You've gone through rehab, you can walk again, you can move around again. Now that that limb is working, you might need to work on something else entirely to get comfortable with moving around in the space once again. So that's another element that you're gonna have to work on. Again, the whole point of this video is just to explain that regardless of whatever's going on in your life, there's always something that you can work on. Learning to walk might be another piece that you'll have to work on. Not to mention, if you happen to carry concealed, you might have to adjust the way you conceal your firearm, because something about the accident, something about the way that it affected your legs might affect the way that you draw or just holster your pistol. So there's always something to work on at every stage of this whole game. And then what do you do when you finally hit all these milestones and get to at least a remotely decent point in attaining your goals? You start all over again, because you might discover that while you might plateau a little bit and get decent a little bit, if you're constantly paying attention to whether you're getting better or not, you might discover, relative to everybody else or relative to the circumstances that you're living in, you might have to improve something else. You might have to get better in a different way. Maybe just for competition's sake, you might need to get a better pistol. You might discover along the way that your firearm that you've been using, that you've been getting comfortable with, doesn't really suit you. You might have had a chance to hold another competitor or friend's gear, test it out, and discover that actually works a lot better for you. So you gotta go back a little bit and change things up just a little bit to suit this new platform or new system that you're using to meet the goal that you've set for yourself. So this whole thing is a continually repeating cycle that you have to keep working on until probably the day you die. Anyway, I hope this was informative in some way. I'm going through some challenges in my life right now that are forcing me to kind of adapt to the current circumstances. That's why I thought this would be kind of an appropriate video to discuss right now in this moment. Maybe I'll share it with you at some point, maybe I won't. But either way, I'm looking for things within the skills that I'm trying to develop to get better at what it is that I'm doing. Right now, it's footwork. It's just transitioning from position to position and getting better at that. Also, it's really nerdy and really detailed and probably not something you really have to do. Because of my eyes, I've been working on long distance focusing a little bit closer, learning to focus on different things in different places as quickly as possible, and really focusing hard on those things, because that's one of the important elements that I've learned about establishing a really good sight picture. So there's always something to work on, and there's always something to discover. And when I'm back up to 100%, then I can hopefully test all these new things out, see if they've improved my game in any way, and adjust if necessary to get back on track with the goals that I set for myself, which is to be a half-decent competitive shooter, which also pays into how good I am when it comes to a real self-defense situation. So I do make these videos on my own time and my own dime, and if you happen to like them, I'll leave a nice little QR code right here for you. You can actually help me quite a bit by liking this video, subscribing so that I can reach out to more people just like yourself and share this message. Also, if you happen to know someone who is stuck in a rut or just needs a little bit of motivation or needs to consider a different angle to what's going on in your life, send them this video, because maybe they just need to think of other creative ways to get better at whatever skill they're developing. Maybe it's around firearms, maybe it's around something else, but these principles do apply to other things in life. All that being said, my name is Mark. Thank you very much for giving me some of your time. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.